Something's wrong. Oh God, something's wrong with the ride. Sarah's voice cut through the carnival music, raw with terror that made every parent in line freeze. For a split second, the entire midway seemed to pause. The laughter stopped. The games went quiet. Even the other rides seemed to slow. From her operator's booth, Sarah Mitchell was frantically hitting the emergency stop button, but nothing was happening. Get them off! Get them off now! She screamed into her radio as the Xtreme Sizzler continued its violent spin, the mechanical grinding getting louder, metal screaming against metal in a sound no one who heard it would ever forget. Maintenance supervisor Jake Rodriguez was already running toward the ride, his tool belt jangling with each stride. Cut the power! Main breaker! Now! But the backup safety systems that should have engaged automatically had failed. The ride that was supposed to spin at 20 rotations per minute was now exceeding 35 and accelerating. In the operator's booth, Sarah made a decision that would define her final moments. Instead of evacuating to safety as protocol demanded, she climbed out onto the spinning platform itself, trying to manually release the safety restraints that trapped 8 terrified riders. "I'm coming! Hold on! I'm coming!" July 17, 2023. Adventureland Amusement Park. Temperature 94 degrees. The Xtreme Sizzler, a spinning ride that had operated for 15 years without serious incident, was about to become the deadliest amusement park disaster in a decade. Sarah Mitchell, 24 years old, engineering student, part-time ride operator, had worked at Adventureland for 3 summers. She was known for her attention to safety, her infectious laugh, and her ability to calm nervous first-time riders. In 47 seconds, she would be dead. Not from mechanical failure, not from her own mistake, but from a cascade of corporate negligence, deferred maintenance, and ignored warnings that turned a preventable malfunction into an unsurvivable catastrophe. What happened to Sarah Mitchell wasn't an accident. It was an inevitability dressed up as a tragedy. You're watching Disaster Chronicles. If this story grips you, subscribe, like, and share, because what you're about to witness is only the beginning. Sarah Mitchell wasn't supposed to be operating rides that summer. She was supposed to be in Germany, completing her mechanical engineering internship at BMW. But when her father was diagnosed with cancer in March, Sarah came home to Columbus, Ohio, took a semester off from Ohio State, and returned to her summer job at Adventureland, the place where she'd worked since she was 18. To her professors, leaving the BMW internship was career suicide. To Sarah, it was simple. Family came first. "I can always find another internship," she told her academic advisor. "I can't find another dad." So instead of designing brake systems in Munich, she was operating the Xtreme Sizzler on the midway, using her engineering knowledge to spot problems other operators missed. Sarah had an unusual relationship with the rides. While other operators saw them as summer jobs, Sarah saw them as mechanical puzzles. She studied their blueprints in her spare time, memorized their maintenance schedules, and could diagnose problems by sound alone. The maintenance crew called her the Ride Whisperer. Sarah understood these machines better than people who'd been fixing them for 20 years. Jake Rodriguez would later testify. "She'd catch things we missed. She saved us from 3 potential failures that summer alone, just by noticing something sounded wrong." Her personnel file was filled with commendations. She'd identified a stress fracture on the Tornado before it became critical. She'd noticed irregular hydraulic pressure on the Thunderdrop that prevented a brake failure. She'd refused to operate the carousel when she detected an electrical smell that turned out to be a melting control panel. Sarah didn't just operate rides, she protected them and the people who rode them. But Sarah's expertise had made her a problem for Adventureland's new management. In January 2023, the park had been acquired by Thrill Capital Partners, a private equity firm specializing in distressed leisure assets. Their strategy was simple: cut costs, maximize revenue, and sell within 3 years. Safety was expensive. Sarah's constant maintenance requests were even more expensive. She's costing us $3.0 a week in repairs that aren't even necessary. Operations manager Bradley Stevens complained in a June email. These college kids think they know everything. We need operators who operate, not diagnose. Sarah had documented her concerns meticulously. Her notebook, recovered after the accident, contained 47 pages of maintenance issues she'd reported that summer. The Xtreme Sizzler alone had 14 entries. June 3. Unusual vibration in central motor during acceleration. June 15. Intermittent grinding sound from main bearing. June 28. Emergency stop delay increased from 1.5 to 3 seconds. July 10. Speed governor engaging late, allowing overspeed before correction. July 14. Metal shavings in hydraulic fluid bearing failure imminent. Each entry was submitted through proper channels. Each was marked deferred or monitor by management. The July 14 warning about metal shavings, submitted just 3 days before the disaster, was never even acknowledged. Sarah wasn't just fighting mechanical problems. She was fighting a culture of willful ignorance. The new management had eliminated the position of safety director to save $85,000 annually. They'd extended maintenance intervals from weekly to monthly. They'd replaced experienced mechanics with cheaper, less qualified contractors. And they'd instituted a policy where ride operators who reported too many issues would have their hours cut. Sarah was caught in an impossible position, her roommate testified. She knew the rides were getting dangerous, but she needed the job to help with her dad's medical bills. She thought if she just stayed vigilant, she could keep everyone safe through the summer. The Xtreme Sizzler was Sarah's biggest concern. Built in 2008, it was a Zamperla-manufactured spinning ride that combined rotation with centrifugal force. Riders sat in cars that spun independently, while the entire platform rotated. When functioning properly, it created a thrilling but safe experience. When malfunctioning, it became a 20-ton centrifuge, capable of generating fatal G-forces. On July 15, Sarah had a heated confrontation with Bradley Stevens about the Sizzler. Witnesses heard her say, "That bearing is going to fail. When it does, the speed governor won't engage. People will die." Stevens responded, "You're not an engineer yet, Miss Mitchell. Operate the ride or find another job." Sarah made a decision that haunts her family to this day. She stayed. She believed her presence was the only thing keeping riders safe. She created her own safety protocols, running the ride at 75% capacity to reduce stress, performing unauthorized inspections before each shift, keeping emergency tools in her booth that she'd purchased herself. On the morning of July 17, Sarah arrived at work at 9 a.m., 3 hours before her shift. She spent those hours inspecting every ride she'd operate that day. Her final text message, sent at 11:47 a.m. to her father, read, "Sizzler sounds worse today. I'm going to run it slow and shut it down early. Home for dinner. Love you." She never made it home. The Xtreme Sizzler was marketed as classic thrills with modern safety, but by July 2023, it was neither classic nor safe. It was a ticking time bomb of deferred maintenance, bypassed safety systems, and catastrophic mechanical failure, waiting for the perfect storm of conditions to unleash its fury. The ride's core design was solid. Zamperla, its Italian manufacturer, had built thousands of similar rides operating safely worldwide. But this specific unit, installed at Adventureland in 2008, had been modified, neglected, and pushed beyond its operational limits for years. What guests saw as a colourful, exciting ride was actually 20 tons of stressed metal held together by luck and Sarah Mitchell's vigilance. The primary problem was the main bearing assembly, a massive component that allowed the ride's platform to spin while supporting its entire weight. This bearing required replacement every 10 years or 50 operating hours. By July 2023, the the Xtreme Sizzler had exceeded 75 0 hours, and the bearing hadn't just worn, it had begun to disintegrate. Internal maintenance records, hidden from state inspectors, revealed the bearing had been rebuilt rather than replaced in 2018, a 15-0 patch job instead of the required 60-0 replacement. The rebuild was performed by an unqualified contractor who used substandard Chinese bearings instead of original Zamperla parts. The work was never documented in official maintenance logs. But the bearing was just the first domino. The speed governor, the critical safety system that prevented overspeed conditions, had been deliberately modified. In 2021, previous management had increased the ride's maximum speed from 20 to 24 RPM to make it more thrilling. This required overriding the governor's safety limits. The modification was performed by bypassing sensor inputs, essentially lying to the control system about the ride's actual speed. The emergency stop system had its own lethal quirk. Originally designed to bring the ride to a controlled stop in 5 seconds, cost-cutting measures had eliminated redundant braking systems. The remaining single brake required precise hydraulic pressure to function. When the hydraulic pump developed a leak in May 2023, instead of replacing it, management had simply increased system pressure to compensate. This created a dangerous situation. The brakes worked, but only if everything else functioned perfectly. Temperature was another factor nobody had considered. The Xtreme Sizzler's control systems were rated for operation up to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. But the control box, painted black and sitting in direct sunlight, could reach internal temperatures of 120 degrees on hot days. At these temperatures, electronic components behaved unpredictably. Safety sensors gave false readings. Emergency stops delayed. Automatic systems failed to engage. On July 17, with ambient temperature at 94 degrees, the control box temperature exceeded 125 degrees. Sarah had reported this issue repeatedly, even suggesting a simple white paint job or shade structure to reduce heat absorption. The suggestion was rejected as unnecessary aesthetic modification. The ride's computer system was perhaps the most dangerous component. In 2019, a ransomware attack had infected Adventureland's network. Instead of paying for proper remediation, management had simply isolated to affected systems. The Xtreme Sizzler's control computer was running on backup software that hadn't been updated since 2017. It couldn't properly process sensor data from modifications made after that date. It was essentially flying blind, relying on operators to manually monitor what should have been automatic safety systems. More terrifying were the known failure modes that management had classified as acceptable risks. Internal emails revealed executives were aware that if the main bearing failed while the ride was at full speed, the platform could separate from its mount. They knew the emergency stop might not engage if hydraulic pressure dropped. They knew the speed governor could be confused by bearing vibration and fail to limit rotation. They accepted these risks because the probability was statistically low and the cost of prevention was economically unjustifiable. The inspection history was a masterclass in criminal negligence. State inspectors were shown carefully curated documentation. Critical components were temporarily repaired just before inspections, then allowed to deteriorate afterward. One maintenance worker, speaking anonymously, revealed they were instructed to use automotive grease on bearings during inspections because it temporarily eliminated noise, even though it would cause accelerated wear. Warning signs in the weeks before the disaster were impossible to ignore. The ride had emergency stopped 6 times in June due to anomalies. Riders complained of unusual vibration and noise. Several reported feeling like the ride was faster than usual and out of control. Each complaint was dismissed as perception issues or first-time rider anxiety. Sarah had created her own monitoring system using her engineering knowledge. She'd attached a wireless accelerometer, purchased with her own money, to track G-forces and detect unusual patterns. Her data, recovered from her phone, showed the ride had experienced overspeed events on July 11, 13, and 16. Each time, she'd manually reduced power to bring it under control. She was literally holding the ride together through sheer vigilance and technical skill. On the morning of July 17, Sarah's pre-shift inspection revealed the situation had deteriorated critically. The bearing temperature was 40 degrees above normal. Vibration had increased 300% from baseline. The emergency stop had taken 4.5 seconds in her test, 50% longer than designed. She documented everything in her notebook, adding in large letters, "Do not operate without immediate maintenance." But when she reported this to Bradley Stevens, his response was captured on security footage. "It's the busiest day of the summer. That ride runs, or you're fired. Your choice." Sarah faced an impossible decision: abandon her post and potentially let a less experienced operator run a dangerous ride, or stay and try to nurse it through one more day. She chose to stay, believing her expertise could prevent disaster. She was wrong. Adventureland Amusement Park had once been Ohio's family fun destination, a beloved local institution operating since 1962. But by 2023, it had become a case study in how private equity ownership could transform a safety-conscious operation into a death trap, prioritizing profits over lives. The transformation began with the January 2023 acquisition by Thrill Capital Partners. The firm, managing $2.3 billion in distressed assets, saw Adventureland as an underperforming asset ready for optimization. Their playbook was simple and ruthless: slash operating costs by 40%, increase ticket prices by 30%, defer all non-critical maintenance, and sell within 3 years at 300% profit. CEO Marcus Webb laid out the strategy in a confidential memo. Every dollar spent on maintenance is a dollar not returned to investors. We need to find the absolute minimum safety threshold that keeps us legally compliant, then operate just above that line. The first casualty was the maintenance department. 15 experienced mechanics with combined experience of 200 years were replaced with 6 contract workers, most with no amusement ride experience. The parts inventory, worth $500, was liquidated. A policy was instituted requiring 3 levels of approval for any repair exceeding $500. The safety inspection process was corrupted through careful manipulation. State inspectors were scheduled during carefully orchestrated windows when temporary fixes made rides appear compliant. A secret $50 annual payment to a consulting firm owned by the chief inspector's brother ensured flexibility in interpretations. Inspection reports were ghostwritten by park management before inspectors arrived. Employee whistleblowers were systematically silenced. When maintenance supervisor Tom Chen reported critical safety violations to state authorities in April, he was fired for time card fraud, a fabricated charge that destroyed his credibility. 2 other employees who raised concerns were transferred to night shifts, had hours cut, or were laid off for restructuring. The park's insurance situation revealed the depth of management's cynicism. They maintained state minimum coverage while secretly purchasing a $50 million business interruption policy that would pay out in case of a fatal accident. Internal emails showed executives discussing how a manageable incident might actually be profitable through insurance claims and lawsuit settlements structured over time. Training budgets were eliminated entirely. New operators received 2 hours of instruction instead of the manufacturer recommended 40 hours. Safety drills were conducted on paper only. Emergency response protocols hadn't been practiced since 2022. The emergency equipment itself, first aid stations, communication systems, evacuation tools, was largely non-functional or missing. Most damning was the existence of two sets of maintenance records. The official logs, presented to inspectors and stored in the main office, showed regular maintenance and minor issues promptly resolved. The real logs, hidden on a private server, revealed 847 deferred repairs, 23 rides operating with critical deficiencies, and systematic falsification of safety data. The Xtreme Sizzler appeared on the critical list 14 times. Each time, the response was the same: defer to end of season or monitor for deterioration. A July 2 entry marked urgent bearing failure imminent was annotated by Stevens. Operate until failure, then claim warranty. The manufacturer, Zamperla, had attempted intervention. After receiving concerning reports, they sent a technical representative in June 2023. His inspection identified 17 violations of operational requirements and recommended immediate shutdown. Adventureland's legal team responded with threats of litigation for interference with business operations. Zamperla was forced to issue a formal disclaimer absolving them of liability, which Adventureland then kept secret from insurers and regulators. Employee morale had collapsed. Turnover exceeded 200% annually. Experienced operators were leaving faster than replacements could be hired. By July, many rides were operated by teenagers with less than a week's experience. They were told repeatedly that rider concerns were normal and that the rides were perfectly safe. The financial pressure intensified as summer progressed. Despite record attendance, the park was hemorrhaging money due to debt service on the leveraged buyout. Thrill Capital demanded $2 million in monthly distributions, regardless of operating needs. This meant every dollar spent on maintenance directly reduced investor returns. On July 14, 3 days before the disaster, a secret meeting occurred between park executives and Thrill Capital partners. The agenda, recovered from deleted emails, managing liability exposure during peak season. The conclusion: continue operations through August, then use the off-season for comprehensive maintenance that would never come. What they didn't discuss was Sarah Mitchell's latest report, submitted that same day, warning of imminent bearing failure on the Xtreme Sizzler. The report was forwarded to legal counsel with a note: prepare standard response, denying knowledge if needed. The park's emergency response plan was a fiction. The documented plan showed coordinated response teams, clear communication protocols, and regular drills. The reality was that security guards didn't have working radios, first aid stations were unstaffed, and the nearest ambulance was 15 minutes away. When disaster struck, chaos was inevitable. The morning of July 17 saw record attendance 500 visitors by noon. Every ride was operating at maximum capacity. The Xtreme Sizzler, despite Sarah's warnings, had a 45-minute wait. Stevens had overruled Sarah's attempt to reduce capacity, insisting on filling all 24 seats each cycle. The stage was set for disaster, and everyone in management knew it. At 2:47 p.m., Sarah made one final attempt to prevent catastrophe. Security footage showed her approaching Stevens with her notebook, pointing at the Xtreme Sizzler, clearly agitated. Stevens was seen dismissing her with a wave. Sarah returned to her operator's booth, where she was recorded making a phone call to her father, telling him she loved him and that she was worried about the ride. At 3:13 p.m., she loaded the last group of riders that would ever board the Xtreme Sizzler. July 17, 2023, 3:13 p.m. The temperature had climbed to 94 degrees, making the asphalt midway shimmer like water. The Xtreme Sizzler's line stretched back 50 yards, families with children, teenagers on dates, tourists with cameras ready. Sarah Mitchell stood at the operator's podium, her hand hovering over controls she knew were failing, watching riders board what she feared might be their last ride. Among the 8 riders were the Morrison family parents, with their twin 12-year-olds celebrating their birthday. There was elderly couple Harold and Margaret Chen, returning to the park where they'd had their first date 50 years ago. 2 college friends, Marcus and Derek, live-streaming their Xtreme ride challenge to followers who would witness disaster in real time. Sarah performed her safety check with unusual thoroughness, personally checking each restraint twice. Security footage showed her lingering at each rider, making eye contact, ensuring they understood the safety instructions. She was documented saying to Mrs. Chen, "If anything feels wrong, raise your hand immediately." It was not standard protocol. Sarah knew something others didn't. At 3:15 p.m., Sarah initiated the ride cycle. For the first 30 seconds, everything appeared normal. The platform began its rotation. Individual cars started spinning. Riders screamed with delight. But Sarah heard what others couldn't, a grinding sound growing louder, a vibration in the control panel that shouldn't exist. The bearing finally beginning its catastrophic failure. At 3:15:45, the main bearing seized momentarily, then released with a violent jolt. The ride lurched, throwing riders hard against their restraints. Sarah immediately hit the emergency stop, but nothing happened. The corrupted control system, overheated and running obsolete software, failed to process the command. She hit it again, and again. Nothing. The ride was accelerating. The failed bearing had caused the drive system to lock in full power mode. Without the governor functioning confused by the bearing's erratic behavior, nothing limited the ride's speed. 20 RPM became 25, then 30, approaching velocities the structure was never designed to handle. "Emergency stop failure, cut main power," Sarah screamed into her radio. But Jake Rodriguez was 200 yards away, dealing with another ride malfunction, a direct result of the skeleton crew staffing. By the time he heard the call and started running, precious seconds had been lost. At 3:16:30, the ride hit 35 RPM. The G-forces were approaching dangerous levels. Riders were pressed against their seats, unable to move or scream. The elderly Chens were already losing consciousness. The Morrison twins were crying, their parents unable to reach them across the centrifugal forces. The live stream showed Marcus's phone flying from his hand, capturing spinning sky before going black. Sarah made a decision that would define her last moments. Instead of evacuating to safety, as protocol demanded, she climbed out of the operator's booth onto the spinning platform itself. Witnesses described it as watching someone try to board a tornado. The platform was rotating so fast that simply standing required incredible strength and balance. Security footage showed Sarah fighting against G-forces 3 times normal gravity, pulling herself along the platform's safety rail toward the manual release mechanisms for the restraints. Her plan was desperate but clear. If she could release the restraints while the ride was still accelerating, riders might be thrown clear before it reached fatal speeds. It was choosing probable injury over certain death. She reached the first car, the Morrison family. Using a manual release tool from her belt, she managed to unlock their restraints. "Jump, now!" she screamed over the mechanical howling. The parents, understanding the alternative, grabbed their children and leaped. They hit the safety fence hard, breaking bones but surviving. Sarah continued to the next car, fighting against forces that made every movement agony. Blood vessels in her eyes had burst from the pressure. Her nose was bleeding, but she reached the Chens, releasing their restraints, just as Harold regained consciousness. She physically pushed them from the ride, their elderly bodies crumpling on the platform's edge, but clear of the main danger. At 3:17:15, the catastrophic failure arrived. The main bearing, ground to nothing, finally separated completely. The ride platform, no longer properly anchored, began to tilt at a 15-degree angle while still spinning at 40 RPM. The structural steel, never designed for these stresses, began to buckle. Sarah had released 6 of the 8 riders when the platform's tilt threw her off balance. She fell hard, sliding toward the center mechanism. Her leg caught in the exposed drive shaft, the same shaft that should have been covered by safety panels removed during cost-cutting maintenance. The grinding machinery caught her uniform, then her body. Jake Rodriguez reached the main power board at 3:17:45, throwing the breaker that finally cut power to the ride. But momentum carried the platform through several more rotations. Witnesses could only watch in horror as Sarah, trapped in the mechanism, was pulled into the machinery that had finally, inevitably failed. The ride's final revolution came at 3:18:23. As it slowed, the 2 remaining riders, Marcus and Derek, were thrown clear, suffering severe injuries but surviving. The platform came to rest, tilted at a 30-degree angle, its support structure mangled beyond recognition. In the center, wrapped in twisted metal and exposed machinery, was Sarah Mitchell. First responders arrived at 3:24 p.m. They found Sarah still conscious, trapped in the mechanism. She was talking, incredibly, giving them instructions on how to safely extract the remaining victims. "Check the Chens first," she said. "They're elderly. Marcus has a head injury. The twins need their parents." She was still protecting others, even as her own life ebbed away. The extraction took 47 minutes. The machinery had to be cut away piece by piece. Sarah remained conscious for most of it, her engineering knowledge helping guide the rescue team. She knew the extent of her injuries. She knew she wouldn't survive. But she kept talking, kept helping, kept being the protector she'd always been. At 4:11 p.m., Sarah Mitchell was freed from the machinery. She lived long enough to hear that all 8 riders had survived. "Good," she whispered. "That's good." She died in the ambulance at 4:23 p.m., her father holding her hand, finally free from the machine she'd fought so hard to keep safe. The aftermath was swift and devastating. Adventureland was immediately closed by state authorities. Criminal charges were filed against Bradley Stevens, Marcus Webb, and 3 Thrill Capital partners for negligent homicide. The investigation revealed everything: the doctored maintenance records, the corruption, the known dangers, ignored for profit. All 8 riders survived, though none escaped unscathed. The Morrison twins required months of physical therapy. Harold Chen suffered a heart attack but recovered. Marcus and Derek, whose live stream captured the disaster, became advocates for amusement park safety reform. All of them owed their lives to Sarah Mitchell's sacrifice. The park never reopened. The site was eventually cleared, and a memorial garden planted where the Midway once stood. At its center, a simple plaque reads, "Sarah Mitchell, 24, engineering student and ride operator. She stayed at her post. She saved 8 lives. She deserved better." Sarah's notebook, with its 47 pages of ignored warnings, became evidence in criminal trials that sent 3 executives to prison. Her father, speaking at the sentencing, said simply, "My daughter died because profit mattered more than people. She knew it would happen. She stayed anyway because she couldn't bear the thought of someone else getting hurt on her watch." Today, the Sarah Mitchell Safety Act requires independent safety inspections, criminal liability for executives who ignore safety warnings, and mandatory shutdown protocols for critical maintenance. It's a law written in blood, paid for with the life of a 24-year-old engineering student who loved machines but loved people more. If you found this story important, please subscribe, share, and remember, every safety regulation exists because someone died without it. Sarah Mitchell deserved better. The 8 people she saved will never forget. Neither should we. We'll see you in the next episode.